I'm going to go ahead and introduce our author for today. Her name is Leigh Ann Henion. Leigh Ann Henion is the New York Times bestselling author of Phenomenal, A Hesitant Adventurer's Search for Wonder in the Natural World. The book is about how she chased eclipses, migrations, and other natural phenomena around the globe to reawaken her sense of wonder. Phenomenal has been named an editor's pick by Oprah Magazine, Backpacker, and Barnes& Noble Review. Henion's writing has appeared in the Smithsonian, Garden and Gun, Men's Journal, Southern Living, and the Washington Post magazine, among other publications. She has received a variety of accolades for her work, including multiple Lowell Thomas Awards, and her stories have been noted in the Best American Essays, the Best American Travel Writing, the Best American Sports Writing, and the Best American Science and Nature Writing. Henion, an Alicia Patterson Fellow for 2020, lives in the mountains of North Carolina. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our guest for today, Ms. Leigh Ann Henion.
Hi, I'm so happy to be with you today. And I thought a lot about where to start this story of my journey to writing Phenomenal, which is this, and this. So this is the hardback and the paperback. But I thought I'd actually just go all the way back to when I was, in school and thinking about what to do. And I think it's a little bit surprising sometimes to people to learn that I actually, when I was a freshman, so I actually did not study writing. When I was young, all my life, writing had been something I was really excited about and interested in, and something that I did on my own time, as a kid, just as my creative outlet. But when I got to college, I actually, I felt like academic writing sort of took the joy out of that process. So I decided to study something way more practical, photography. So if you can imagine, so then I went to photography, which is really another form of storytelling. And I actually think that studying photography, writing about photography later, and also studying cultural studies, which is actually what my undergraduate degree is in. So it was cultural studies with a track in photography. But I think that actually, in choosing what to photograph, you're focusing on details that tell a story. So I actually think that helped me be a better storyteller later on when I went back to writing. So if you can imagine my parents, wanting kind of me to choose something practical, I'm going between, I'm going to be a writer, I'm going to be a photographer. None of these are completely practical career paths, but they're wonderful paths. So but they're non-traditional paths, I think, in some senses. But ultimately, I think that everything that I studied as part of my cultural studies degree, and I did go on later to study writing, but I think that everything I studied early on as a student, it informs the work that I do now. And, I was talking to a friend of mine from college, and this was a very long time ago, but he was saying, I think, Leigh Ann, you're the only person I know that actually uses exactly what you studied, because I studied very broad things and kind of wild things, but the whole time I was really following interests and what really got me passionate. And so starting out, talking to students, I feel like that's really important, because I think that a lot of times when you're studying, when you're trying to figure out what you might want to do with your life or what path you want to take, it doesn't always feel like there's a plan, or it doesn't always seem, you want to take a class in this and this. And I think from the outside, a lot of times that's confusing for people, and maybe even for you. But I really, just in my life, I found that somehow down the road, this class and this class come together because they come together because they're my interests. So there's no way to know how it's going to come together down the path. But I don't know. I think oftentimes we don't get a lot of encouragement to trust ourselves and to trust those interests and to trust that they will come together. So I don't know. I want to start by just saying I started out with some very seemingly divergent interests, and ultimately they led to a really rewarding and often, winding career path, which is what I have. So I did start out studying cultural studies in photography, so cultural studies, anthropology, just, the way that we think about things, the way that we form them, and how did it lead to phenomenal. So one of my great mentors has been an editor at the Washington Post magazine. So many years ago, he we were thinking about story ideas, what we might work on together. And he said, I've always wanted to send someone to write about the monarch butterfly migration in Mexico. And I was like, I will do that. And so I did. And I had a really moving experience. And I wasn't familiar with the nuances of the monarch migration to Mexico before I took that assignment on. And what I love about having assignments as a journalist is that each one feels like a miniature quest. I start out with questions that I hope to answer. And sometimes that just leads to more questions, which to me is very exciting. But in this case, it led to questions like, if I didn't know about this, what else don't I know about? So east of the Rockies, the entire population of monarch butterflies travels down to this very specific place in Mexico where you are surrounded. There are so many butterflies. It was an extraordinary experience. And so I started wondering about other things that I had never experienced in that way, because I think that, we live in a world where if we don't know something, we should definitely be able to Google it. But what I realized is, while we can Google a lot and there's a lot of information out there, there's so much that's not known. And also, things that it's just always a process of discovery. So in the end, I went to see the Aurora Borealis. I went to the Serengeti to witness the migration of wildebeest. So I had these really extraordinary experiences, and ultimately, the science of these natural phenomena and the cultures that were on the ground in these locations, they often and the mythology and the stories that were shared, they often were intertwined in really meaningful and interesting ways, which is, that cultural studies starts coming in. For example, I know that there are maybe some science students in the audience. For example, in Hawaii, so the eruptions of a volcano in Hawaii, there are traditional stories and traditional dances that actually recorded long before Western modern science could figure out when these eruptions had happened. They actually had recorded this in different ways that hadn't really, nobody had been listening to those voices in a sense. So this really is storytelling. I think that storytelling is one of the most powerful forms of connection and one of the most powerful change agents that we have in this world. And there are so many things to be written about. And so, even if you're not someone who is thinking that you want to be a writer as your career, as your identity, whether you want to be a historian, a biologist, an engineer, whatever it is that you're excited about, whatever this wild class that you're taking in this wild class, and how do those interests even go together, that's the exciting part, because that's what you are kind of on a quest to find out, because that's your unique perspective that you can share with the rest of us who don't know about engineering or biology. So right, a lot of the work that I do is, it's writing about the natural world and how cultures sort of interpret the natural world, how I interpret the natural world, and interact with it. I think that the stories that we tell each other really guide the way that we interact with nature, with each other. They dictate how we live out our lives. So we have narratives that we're told, and then the narratives that we share. And so, for example, so after Phenomenal was published, so that's my first and only to this point book. But my journalism work, I'm actively, continually doing that work. And my most recent long form story, so long form in journalism is usually 3,000 words plus on an article, which is long for an article. But my most recent was about synchronous fireflies. So there were a couple of years where traveling, which I've done a lot of travel work, and travel wasn't happening. So it was like, what's a travel story close to home? What's something right around me that I have always wanted to experience and learn about, and I haven't had the opportunity to do it, or I haven't made that a priority. So I prioritized going to see synchronous fireflies in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which really is magnificent and not unlike, the monarch butterflies in Mexico. We have the synchronous fireflies on the border of North Carolina and Tennessee, and people come from all over the world to see this natural phenomena that happens right here. So I did write that piece. It was, I think, last September. So it was published in the Washington Post. If you're interested in learning about the nuances of synchronous fireflies, which is, it's a species of firefly that they flash in unison and communicate in ways that are sort of like a bird murmuration, you see, and you're like, how are they working together? Synchronous fireflies do that with light. But so on that journey, I realized that, I went out wanting to learn about, the science of this. I wanted to seek out light as this form of hope in dark times. But what I realized in that process of walking around in the dark, night after night, with my notebook and my headlamp with the red light, because that's less disruptive to eyesight, what I learned is that I actually needed to reconcile with darkness, because it was actually, I went looking for the light as hope, but I actually found solace in darkness, which is, culturally, we're really not encouraged to walk around in the dark at night. I mean, you talk to scientists who do that, and they'll often tell you stories of, the police came after me, or someone threatened to call the police, so I was afraid of someone with guns. It's if you're out at night, people assume that you're up to no good, rather than like seeking out fireflies or frogs or whatever it is you're looking for. But so anyway, when this story was published, one of the things that really struck me was the fact that that a lot of people who responded to this and wrote emails and comments, was that in addition to getting really excited about, they were remembering their own experiences with fireflies, and they were, it was kind of a, like me, they were excited, like to learn about the fact that, while the synchronous species is really amazing and famous, even like around Raleigh, anywhere where there's a field with fireflies and some woods nearby, you're probably going to see a lot of different species of fireflies, and they all have their own language. And it's just that we're not, paying attention. We're not really, observing long enough to really notice that. But one of the things that really moved me with those responses to that story was that people were writing to me and, talking about when they were a kid, and they remember chasing fireflies and having these magical experiences in nature. But then as part of this story, I started like light pollution and how it's increasing in our world, in our culture, and how that affects fireflies, how it affects the circadian rhythm of animals, all sorts of animals, including humans. And so multiple people were like sending me emails and saying, I'm so glad you wrote this, and I've started turning out my porch lights. And so that was really powerful. I mean, it seems really small to turn out a porch light, but maybe everybody has things that they're concerned about in the world right now. And one of the things I think that's really draws me and is powerful to me, and what was behind me choosing this class and this class, there's a real for me, the natural world and the perspective, how we see it and how we interact with it, I think on a very fundamental level, that's one of the things that gets me most passionate. And so I think that one of the most challenging things, and it's not just with, you could call it environmental issues or, whatever it is that you would say, like, what are some of the great questions? What are some of the great challenges that we have globally? I think the pandemic's really opened up this conversation. There's a global and local, but whatever challenges that really like whatever challenges you feel like you have like prioritized in your life. The question is how to give people perspective that helps them understand what it is that gets you excited, enraged, whatever your emotions are around it, and maybe all of those mingled together. It's really, how do we communicate that in a way that helps people understand different perspectives? And beyond that, how do we get people to take action, to make the world a better place, and I mean that truly, and honestly, like the flick of a switch in terms of light pollution, that's helpful. That's a positive move. And so it was really moving to me that story had actually, wherever people were reading it, whatever their neighborhood looked like, their lives, whatever backgrounds they were coming from, that story had motivated some sort of action. And it seems so small, but it kind of culminates into big things, right? But so I think, in terms of the natural world and the environment, and a lot of you, in your science classes, or maybe you're concerned about climate change and, all of these domino effect things. But the real thing is, how do we present these things that we care about, that are crucial to, life on Earth, in ways that motivate people to examine their perspective, gain perspective, and then ultimately how to take action. Whether it's flicking off a switch or, whatever it is related to whatever you feel like is important, how to do that. And I think that, sometimes when you're in school, writing sort of feels like this task that has to be done for somebody else. You're writing it to get a credit, to please your instructor. But ultimately, I mean, I think that to really take ownership of storytelling, and to think, how to use your own storytelling to share and shape those perspectives and create action. It's really, I don't know, it's so important, and it's so empowering. I think that it just has so much potential empowerment in it. It's innate empowerment, storytelling. I hope that can be some sort of motivation, because I think ultimately it's really, in terms of creating a career in writing, that's its own thing, and I would be excited to talk about that specifically. But also, no matter what your career path, I just think that being able to communicate, it's not not only because it's a marketable skill or whatever, it's like to be able to communicate in ways that have meaning and like shape-shifting culture powers. I think that's really important. If you're an engineer, it's like, I think it's amazing. And whatever, say you have, I don't know, like I don't know why I've chosen engineering. I'm not the background. Let's actually say, so you are a engineer. So you're gonna do some sort of amazing photovoltaic system, and it's like, well, why do we need this photovoltaic system? What is it going to do? How does it work? And why does it have meaning for individuals, for communities? And whatever your job is, it's like, why does it have meaning, and how to communicate that? And if you're writing an essay or an article, sometimes you're explaining things, but when you're thinking creative storytelling, which I think that most forums are open to creative storytelling, if that's how you're presenting it. There's the what you start out with and where you end up. So I think in any story, so for me, because I often write myself into stories, it's about kind of the questions that I start out with, and through the process of exploring, through the process of researching, and then how that shapes the way that I see things. Because when you start a piece of writing, the most exciting thing to do is to start with a question where you're not quite sure what it is. You can start out saying, I think that, firefly, like preserving the lives of fireflies is the most important thing in the world. So you could start out with that, but what if you just start out saying, fireflies, I've always wanted to see these fireflies. This is my journey on the Firefly Story. So I've always wanted to see this phenomenon. Like, why do they flash in it? Like, what's going on there? And why do hundreds, thousands, why do people come from all over the world to see them? Like, that's interesting to me. That's exciting. That's to me, like, as exciting as seeing the fireflies is, being with people who have traveled, around the world sometimes to see these fireflies. What is the motivation there? And so these two things together, exploring other people's motivations, sort of understanding my own interests, and then learning how fireflies are actually more amazing than I even knew. It's like ultimately, we come to some unexpected revelation, which is for me that I went out looking for light, but what I actually needed was this reconciliation with darkness. And I think in our culture, it's, when we have all this artificial light, we don't even think about these lights being on and how they're affecting circadian rhythms of these animals, because we're not really given stories that present darkness as something that is innately nurturing and life-giving for living beings. I think it's often presented, darkness equals death rather than darkness equals the genesis of life, which is actually what it is in a lot of narrative presentations when you really dig into it. That's kind of, I really I would love to have. I know it's super early for Q&A, but I feel like if at any point somebody has a question or they're like, okay, she's gone on about the fireflies, but I want to hear more practical advice, I would love to hear that. On a practical note, for the creative writing students, or if you're kind of thinking about it and you're like, you know what, like I am really passionate about solar energy, or I think that people need to, hear this album that I love, and your thing is music. If you're interested in, practical, how would I go about sharing my work? Please do ask. But so I started out. So before the book, in between the book and the I'm taking the classes, I started working at a community newspaper, which is how that's how I sort of wrote my way into my job, which again, it's kind of a crooked career path. But so if say you're like, I love this band. There's a band in Chapel Hill. They don't get enough recognition, and somebody should really write about them. And they have a show coming up. Contact your local weekly. This is kind of like this is like old school. This is like, yeah, I did work in a dark room. Like, it wasn't all digital. That's how long ago it's been. So a little bit of that is outdated, but still the weeklies are there. It's like whatever, in the bins. It's like, approach these publications, or even online. And I'm going to have, this one's really, really out of left field, perhaps. But, there are even some forms of social media that I think if you really want to study how people are communicating using social media, I think it's really exciting. And so, like Instagram, for example, is it's a visual storytelling format. But in captions, I would call captions in Instagram actually micro stories. And so I think that, with I'm going to do an album review, or I'm going to experiment with a micro story in Instagram about, whatever it is you're excited about, or these specific things that you would like to share with people. I think that these are all valid and interesting ways to go about it. And you guys have a familiarity with all sorts of media and storytelling. And again, I think they're really interchangeable. I think that one of the things that makes great storytelling is that you start out with the question and you sort of work your way into an answer that sort of leads to more questions, or kind of sends the reader off with questions of their own, which you can't control, but you can get people excited and curious, which is the challenge. But one of the things I think people often want to know is, how do I find places that are publishing things that I'm interested in? Or, maybe creative writing, like, what is that even, how does that relate to me if I'm, studying whatever it is, your career path, wherever it's going to lead. And I think that one of the things I did starting out, and it actually mentioned in my bio, but one of the things I did starting out, and this is an ancient book, but it's still to this day the best American travel writing. So there's this, and there's the best American science and nature writing. I'm not sure if there's the best American sports writing. So say you're in exercise science, and you're like, man, people don't know enough about whatever it is, and you want to inspire or interest people in it. I think that this series is a really wonderful place to start. And again, there, science, travel, there are a lot of things covered here. And in the back, there's a notable travel rating. So you can see they look at magazines, online publications. Every year there's an editor and then a guest editor who are vetting, all these different publications and saying, these people are doing great work. This is storytelling that is meaningful and artful. And they tell you where they're finding them. And then in the back, there's even notable. And in the notables, it's a list of publications, both online and in print, that are doing really, really great work. So you can start to sort of fall down rabbit holes with that and research who and what publications are doing a really great job about with that work. I see a question here. It says, I'm passionate about writing and making things out of my hands. I want to know, how did you take the strength to take those steps, even if you were scared? And I'm not sure if that means about publication or if that means to just create it in the first place. But I think can answer both of those. So passionate about writing and making things. I think that means like art, like creating art. So how do you take the step to make the art, to craft the story, to to make the painting, to do anything creative? It's really, you know what? It's really scary. It is scary, and I think that the strength actually is in the creation of it, to find the strength to make real those creative impulses. Because again, back to culturally, I think we're in a culture where the overwhelming norm is to kind of take the classes that make sense. Let's try to find the career path that makes sense. And often making art and making things with your hands and writing short stories or whatever it is you're passionate about is counterculture. It's you kind of declaring that creative. It's kind of like you making space for creativity, and that can be scary and that can be hard, especially if you feel like that's not being supported. So hopefully you have people around you who share that passion. So the key here, actually, so you've said you're passionate and you want to know about finding that strength. I actually think that the strength is in the passion. So you just have to focus on the passion. And that passion, when you feel passionate about something, I think that is your sign that you're on the right path. So when you're passionate about something, you have to pay attention to that. And when you're paying attention to that, I think that the more you create, the more that you write, the more that you're making, I think that actually becomes the material that actually becomes supportive in its own way. Your own creations can support you as you take those next steps. It's so it's not so much about strength. It's really about trusting that passion and really letting that passion guide you. And so the strength, I mean, I have to tell you another thing, but there's criticism, right? So if you create, you open yourself to criticism, which maybe is I don't know. It's like there's the actual vulnerability of creating, and then there's the fear of how are people going to react to this. So I think taking those steps is the passion is the key. To find the things that you can't not take the steps. It's sort of like sometimes people ask, how do you come up with so many story ideas? And so I'm like, how can everybody not have a million story ideas every second? So that's how I feel. So, okay, we have another question from Jennifer. It says, can you tell us about a nature experience you were covering that was especially difficult to translate into a story? And what about that experience was hard to convey, and how did you overcome it? Oh, I mean, there are so many. There's so many. So I actually you said a nature experience. So let's see. I mean, I think that whatever the experience is, I think it can be especially difficult to translate into story when, I think almost every time I sit down to write a book chapter, a magazine article, I get really scared. These are actually, I'm covering both questions in one. I actually am really scared every time I sit down to write, because the first challenge is getting over that fear. Like I'm ready to write. I'm passionate about whatever I'm writing about, but how do I move forward? So it's like I move forward because I have this passion, this impulse that I I almost can't even stop. Once I'm on it, it's like, okay, I'm going to let this lead me. And then I sit down. And so the real challenge is, do I have enough material to work with? So for me, I'm actually doing field work. Maybe you're a historian who isn't necessarily dealing with tangible place. Maybe you're dealing with some, like, I don't know, I'm not sure, but it's something not so tangible. But for me, it's like being in the field, being in nature, right? So I have an experience in nature. How do I convey that? So I sit down and it's like, do I have enough material? Have I had an experience that makes me feel like I'm overwhelmed, which usually I am, because typically if I have gone out seeking this experience in nature, it's a really overwhelming experience. It's an awe-inspiring experience, and I have too much material, which is so scary, right? But at the same time, I can't create the field work. I can't create the material. That's like magic. That's like, you're out there and amazing things are happening and you're getting to witness it. But having to sort through that, that's the translation, right? How do you translate that into story? And it used to be, this is terrible, but writing used to be a lot easier for me. It's gotten harder as I've gotten more experience, as I've gotten older. And I'd like to think that it's because I'm sort of wrestling with bigger questions and bigger experiences. I'm not sure. But so what about the experience was hard to convey? I think, again, what's hard to convey is I'm trying to take what's in the tangible world and intertwine that with what's kind of happening with my perceptions of it. And the first key is to take all that material and filter it, which is so challenging. And how do I do it? Sometimes not very gracefully. It's just my first draft is just a jumble of notes. Doesn't even make sense. And then I just have to spend an just a ridiculous amount of time kind of going over that. And I used to feel like I needed to have the first line set, and then it would lead the rest of the story. But what's interesting is over time, I often will know how something ends before I know how it begins. So I overcame the challenge of writing that. I overcome it every single time I sit down. In the process of doing it, there's just get in the chair or whatever people say about that. But I think it's true. And I also think that, the best part of writing to me, there's a moment when I know that I have enough material, I'm overwhelmed, which is really scary. I sit down, I'm trying to filter it. I'm trying to figure out the structure of a story. And when I structure a story, I'm often thinking about it in scenes. So, scene 1, scene 2, just like a movie, it's like you have scene, and so I'm often thinking of it like that. And, once I have the structure of it, then there's a moment where I'm not quite there, but I know that I'm on to something. I feel like I'm starting to get control of whatever the shape is, that I've taken this, this giant thing. I have a friend who's a potter, and it's like every time it's like she's always takes the big, this is working with it. She takes this big chunk of clay and she throws it down in her wheel, and it's like she just, and then you center the clay, right? So you center it, and it's like there's a moment in writing a story where it's like I've taken this giant lump of clay and I've thrown it down, and it's like, oh my God, it's all over the place, and finally I've centered it. And that is actually my favorite part. My favorite part of writing is not having written, which is, there's a famous quote about that. My favorite part of writing is actually that moment and that part of the process where the story, where I've kind of gotten control of the structure, and I know I'm onto something and I'm not quite there, but there's a great joy in seeing what the final shape is going to be. And I think that, to me, the way that I think about storytelling, in a sense, the story kind of, it's its own, it's revealing itself to me as I'm working on it, like a pot. I mean, I think, the potter's in control of the clay, but at the same time, it's like, you have the material that you're working with, and it also has a role to play. Again, it's like I take the experience that I've been given in the field, and it's my job is to sort of help figure out what is that story. How is it revealing itself? And so hopefully I don't know. I'm using all the hands and the creation metaphors, but are there other questions from the library?
Yeah, so we've had so many great questions from online. So I'm just going to give a few moments for those of us that are here downstairs in the library. If anyone has any questions for our author, we'll have a few moments to answer those. Does anybody have any questions?
This is actually a great time to say, asking questions. My work it's great because it gives me an excuse to ask questions. And I think I love questions. So please don't hesitate. Bring them.
Do you have any tips? We have a question. Do you have any tips for any prospective writers?
Prospective writers. Well, this is when I would so could I ask the writer who has asked the question if they have any specific sort of writing or interest that they would as an example, the person who asked the question.
I think the big interest here is YA writing.
YA writing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so is this a particular class that's focused on YA, or just the kind of the vibe of the room?
I think this is just a general interest.
Okay.
General interest writing.
I love this. So as I was saying, I have a 12-year-old son, and so it's been really exciting for me to be able to spend time in the YA world, and all of the things that I was talking about applicable. But do I have advice for an aspiring writer who's interested in YA? Well, the obvious, you're probably already reading everything you can get your hands on, and getting excited about that, and hopefully you have a community of other writers who are around you. Again, if you're passionate about YA, to find other people who are passionate about that, and also, in terms of finding ways. Also with YA, and again, I'm not a YA writer, but I think that one of the best things you can do if you have a particular interest and you have a particular readership, and YA is not all for young adult. I mean, it's adults and young adults read, but if you have a particular interest in YA, I think if I was going to write, if I was like, you know what, I want to write a YA book about whatever I was interested in, I would think first of all, how can I get a better understanding of my readership in that sense? So are there programs in the community that are working with young people? Are there there are programs, I know, and you guys might be in a place, Boone doesn't have one, we're a smaller community, but in your area, is there a program that works with kids who are interested in writing? Is there a mentorship program that you could work? It's not just about you learning, how to write YA. It's like, is there a way for you to sort of, going back to the cultural studies, it's like, well, if you're going to write for, young adults have they have their own culture. As the parent of a 12-year-old, I'm always learning. Like, sometimes I Google things and my son's like, this is what it's come to. And I'm like, yes, it is. Because I'm trying to figure out, one of the subcultures, insider language, all these things, it's there. And so it's not just about learning to be a better writer of those stories. It's also what's drawing you to YA as a genre, and also, the community of readers that you're hoping to reach. What is it that they're writing about? What is it that they're interested in? Like, sort of, how do those things interplay? How does what you've learned, at a later stage in your life, how does that intersect with what readers, potential readers of that work, need, you know? So I think it's like, what do you have to give? What do they need? And how do those intersect? I mean, so I think that working with, finding a way to work with young writers and writers, potentially of your own cohort who have that passion. That would be that I would suggest that.
That's wonderful advice. I have a question, just for me. I know that you mentioned earlier about when you got started. You started writing for your community newspaper or for a community
Yes.
publication.
Yes.
So, other than just trying to look at, just your local publications to get started with getting published, what are some other networking tips that you have for people who are trying to get into publishing?
I think that there are often conferences. There's the North Carolina Writers. There's state conferences. You don't have to if you're excited about writing and you want to find a community of writers. You don't usually have to look very far. They're locally, state level. I think that conferences are really helpful. I also think, when I was starting out, again, this has been a long time, but and actually, it's been a while since but it was like mediabistro.com. It's just a website. It's all about the industry. It's all about journalism. And this was again many years ago. So there are probably like many other websites that have come and got since then. But I found that incredibly helpful. They have a whole section. It's like if you're interested in pitching magazines, which, trying to write a letter to get someone to give you an assignment, that's an art in itself. And so they have a whole section that's like how to pitch. There's Poets and Writers magazine, which, online, and maybe you even have in the library there, tangible copy. In the back there, they have, they have fellowships, they have contests listed. And so I would also suggest, in terms of networking, I think that, like writers groups, conferences, but there's also sort of like beyond networking, it's like finding ways to give yourself kind of like a goal. And it's like the goal isn't even necessarily to win the award or to have the piece published. Your goal starting out, which I did this so many times, like with myself. And the other thing is rejection. I'm like, take rejection, like every rejection you ever get if you do start sending out, I'm like, you got to celebrate every rejection because you're putting yourself out there, you're trying. And so like, okay, so you take Poets and Writers, for example, take Poets and Writers, you see these contests, you're interested in young adult, you find one that's young adult, you're interested in poetry, you'll find multiple in poetry. Which one seems to be, you look at who won last year and the year before that, which one kind of feels like it's in line with like your kind of style or your content interest. So you pick some and you say, okay, I'm going to come up with, like 3 contests that I'm going to enter this year. And sometimes they charge a little money, but if you don't want, like, there are a lot of that you don't have to pay. They're just free. All you have to do is get over that fear, get the passion, send it, and know that just, rejection. Who cares? Because that's not the point. The point is that you're challenging yourself to create something that you feel good about, and you're meeting that deadline, and you're sending it out there, and you're moving. You're going to keep it in motion. And another thing that's helpful. So say you get one, you don't make the finalists. You already have you can have a second on your list. You make a little list, and you have. So after there's this contest, I'm going to write a particular for that, or I'm going to choose a column in this publication that I want to, like, that's where I would love to be published. Like, writers suggest, or something like that. There's a column in there specifically. So you choose that, and then say you get rejected, celebrate because you put yourself out there and you created it. And then you look at your list that you've made and you say, okay, where is it going to go next? Because it's just constant. It's like, it's like natural cycles. It doesn't mean it's like, it's just regeneration. Where are you going to send that next? Like keep it going. Just keep, have attainable goals, and then just keep moving. but it's, and how to get over that strength to take the steps, even if you're scared, which, harken back to that. It's really scary. But if you're passionate about creating, just think of that as like, you're not looking to win. You're looking to challenge yourself. You're looking to find some goalposts to just keep you moving forward. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's great.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. I mean, I really think that like, when I think, I still do that. But I mean, I think early on, that was so, in particular, early on, that was so important to find that structure to give yourself, So you find the community, and then you also find a way to structure that interest. It's not unlike when you're trying to structure a story. It's like, okay, my story, the narrative I would like to write is that I'm gonna be a published poet. So it's like, okay, like, that's big. So how do we, start to find smaller stories? I'm going to enter this poetry contest. You're a poet. If you write poetry, also, you're a poet. You don't have to publish it to be a poet. Yeah. And some people, spoken word, right? It's not even always about what's on the page. It's storytelling. It's practicing your storytelling skills. And there's so many different ways that narratives are powerful and moving. More questions? One more question. Somebody's got a question.
Anybody else in the audience have any questions for our author?
What was your favorite experience that you had to write about?
We have a question. What was your favorite experience that you've written about?
The hard-hitting questions from the back. It's like impossible. It's like, people like their children. It's like, I don't know how to choose favorites. For me, I don't know. It's like, I can say, well, these feel like, these might be the strongest pieces I've written, but for me, it really kind of comes down to like, what, not so much what was my favorite. I don't know. I can't even think about it in those terms. But I can think about in terms of like, what stories sort of were the most transformational. So not so much about what it was, it's not even so much about how much I enjoyed it. I don't know what makes a favorite, is it like, this one was fun to write, or I think I did a really good job with this one. But for me, I think favorite sort of means like, what were the most transformational stories for me, like the most meaningful, where in a narrative arc, you start the journey, and this is the person you are in the beginning. You end the journey. This is the person you are in the end. So I think, for me, the favorites are the ones where I just so unexpected. And by the end, I'm like, the way that I see things are completely transformed, which actually I would say, in Phenomenal, when I was, it's like, how do you choose between the Aurora Borealis or the Great Migrations of Tanzania? How do you choose? But what actually was really, really transformational for me was related to the story of the volcano that I mentioned in Hawaii. And in the process of writing that chapter, so I was saying all of this information was culturally ingrained, right? So I couldn't see you guys then, but I told that whole story. And so I actually, in that chapter, I was taken in by hula hulao, by these wonderful traditional dancers. They were, like young, older, just various ages, and they took me in, and they really helped me understand hula as an art form. So hula as an art, we think grass skirts, and they're all like, you see a movie, and it's like people are in grass skirts. They're at the luau. They're in Hawaii. So hula is actually an incredibly powerful tradition that encodes traditional knowledge of Hawaiian culture in dance, in this art form. And so, for example, like Pele goddess of fire who lived in this volcano. So the dances recorded that Pele had there's like the chant and there's the dance. And so in the chant, Pele, the goddess, has a fight with her sister, and she pushes her sister, falls. So the dance is recording, the chant and the dance. They're recording that this happened, and Pele like pushed her sister and dug her and like there's all of this action happening. And so it very recently, that's what the Geologic Society has actually learned, that these dances and these chants, when she's digging here, she's pushing her sister there, there's a collapse in the volcano, there's an eruption in the volcano. So all of these things were recorded. Before science got to it, this art form had recorded this scientific knowledge, like, generations ago. So I think for me, like one of my, I can't pick a favorite out of the book, for example, but for me, that experience and like really being with people who were continuing that tradition and those other ways of knowing was incredibly powerful for me. And I think that moving forward, it really informs the way that I try to think about, whose voices we're listening to, which art forms we value, what sort of knowledge, we're looking at. So, to me that, I don't know, it's not the only favorite. Everyone's a favorite. But for me, that was really transformational in the way that I was thinking. So that made it a favorite among many favorites. I don't know. Is that kind of a cheat answer? But it's complicated stuff, but it really was meaningful to have that perspective.
Thank you. Are there any other final questions or any other questions that we have for the author here today? Are there any more online?
And I'm not seeing any more online. What do we have? One more online? I can't see.
I think we're. So
Okay.
if we don't,
there's one more question.
Okay, we got one more question.
In the meantime, so that question is being typed. I would ask anybody in the audience. So there's an interest in why. Is there like what other people? We actually were having a conversation earlier about it, but things that what people are really enjoying reading, like the sort of things that they would be excited to present themselves or create themselves.
So what kinds of things what are you interested in? What kinds of interests do you have as far as not just what you have an interest in writing, but what do you have an interest in reading as well? Anybody want to contribute?
I just want to talk about online resources. I too was a professional writer for many years. I started teaching. I worked in New York. I was fashion and beauty director for Oprah Magazine. I wrote for Women's Health and Fitness. The Great Travel Hangers, Yes, Foreman out in Los Angeles. But when I was starting out, which was way before your time offshore, it's when boards were still faced up and we were taking pictures of them. There was really nothing online. There was no blogs. There was nothing that anybody could just contribute to. So what advice would you have to students maybe looking to break in, maybe to start blogging or just sort of self-publish?
So a question about advice about breaking into online publications, blogging, and those types of things.
Well, I think that that's a whole world unto itself. And I think there's some fairly easy platforms to create in terms of starting a blog. Pretty easy format. maybe I would, my suggestion would maybe be, you like practically to come up with the forum, and then also thematically, what thematically are you looking to do? And I would start sort of like, with the Best American series, I would start by looking at like people who are doing the sort of work that you admire, and it could be totally different thematics, but like, like there are the graphic elements, there are the visual elements in a blog. If you're doing it yourself, you're kind of like, there's content, content creators, there's visual, there's text, to just look at people who are doing really great design work. Who do you admire their design work? Who do you feel like is doing a good job with thematically? Just there are all these different aspects to look at. And I also would suggest kind of, again, circling back, I think that if you're interested in that, but you're a little bit hesitant and not sure exactly where you want to go with it, I think that, to think small, like, social media, again, and someone who's interested in scripting, scripting TikTok. I mean, there's like, there are all kinds of ways, like, script writing for television. There's a whole, there are many different forms of storytelling. So there's TikTok. Who's doing TikTok? Instagram, again, I really think in terms of a something bite-sized to start out. You look at someone who has an amazing Instagram site, it's like visually, how are they creating a grid that's visually appealing and looks cohesive? What are they doing? It doesn't even matter the content. You're just like, what do they do that makes it? Is it filters? Is it, is it a mix of close up, far away? These are all things that translate to writing as well. You have a detail, then you give an overview. They're very interchangeable narrative strategies, I think. And so in that caption, it's like, seriously, it's like, tell me that I can have 10,000 words. I write 10,000 words like so fast, but then tell me I have to make it 3,000. That's harder. So I think that in a way it's a little challenging, but to create some sort of structure, kind of, again, structure where you can have a goal and achieve it. So say, Instagram's just, I think, a really nice example. I mean, I have friends who have had various, like they're flower farmers, or they make jewelry, or whatever they do. And I've, kind of watching them start an Instagram page and thinking up, like, what are the tiny stories related to what I care about that I can tell that are engaging and meaningful for people that can, take my perspective and share lifestyle, whatever it is. So I would say structure. So you're looking at the, who has that, who's doing programming that's easy to create that blog format, who's doing a good job with making it happen. And then also lower stakes, maybe, are there formats that would allow me to sort of have smaller goals, like a post a week, just one post a week? Is there a tiny story, a paragraph that I want to share of something, special that I made, or something that I encountered that's related to my overall narrative that I want to share? So the question online is, what was your first hit of, whoa, I want to do this? Oh my goodness. So, like I said, when I was a kid, loved to write. It was just something that I naturally did. But my first hit of, whoa, I want to do this, I think it was something that I was always interested in and always excited about. I do think that, again, I really thought I was going to go into photography. So I interned at a newspaper as a photography intern. But I came back to writing at that community newspaper. And I really enjoyed doing it. My first hit of, like, I really want to do this. I wrote a story, actually. It's my first hit of I really want to do this and I want to keep doing it was just being at that community newspaper. I think that writing about the community that I was living in, and seeing it day to day make a difference. And you know, you write about something and people can actually, you can see that engagement. It's sort of like you can actually see people starting to turn out the lights. Like I was saying, you know, to reduce light pollution, just flick of a switch. You know, you can actually see through your stories that come out in this newspaper that it's affecting people's lives, and you can do that in a positive way. I think that was really motivating and inspiring. So it's like, you know, it's like, how do you overcome fear? I think it's that passion, and also finding inspiration, which kind of harks back to why I think that if you're interested in young adult, maybe a beautiful thing would be to work with young writers, because young people are inspiring. And I think that it's holding on to that passion, letting that motivate you, and then finding opportunities to be in you know, whether it's in nature and being inspired, or with kids who are like, you know, kind of experiencing that, whoa, I want to do this, the power of storytelling for the first time. It's like, how do you put yourself in the path of inspiration? I think that if you can do that, like, it, you know, the nuts and bolts of it, you know, I think that, you know, hopefully I've given a few nuts and bolts and kind of some places to look in this conversation, but I'm so thrilled by your questions, and I'm grateful to you for having me, and I'm thrilled, and I would love to, if anybody wants to follow up, I would just be happy to answer any questions. If anybody found inspiration in any part of this, I'm happy to be a resource.
Well, thank you so much, Leigh Ann, for joining us today. We enjoyed your talk, and we learned so much from you. So we hope you have a good afternoon. And thank you for joining us again.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed being here.